Hey, this is a mini ep of the podcast. While I've got ya, where I talk to our dad of the week about a completely unrelated topic that I was keen to ask them about. Big thanks to Fruit for the sponsor. Check out that app in our link. But back to this week's dad for this week's While I Got Ya. What do you think's helpful to help your kids integrate into church for themselves as they grow up? You know what I mean? Like, kids' existence in church comes alongside with you in the little years, and then at some point they're not even in your house, but they exist within a church themselves, and they kind of opt in, opt out. Almost like, how do you transition your kids, and what can you do that helps them integrate into the church family and see that as their family, kind of irrespective of my parents? You know what I mean? Do you have any thoughts on that? And what's helpful? And yeah.
The first thing is how you treat the gathering, the Sunday gathering, the body of believers called church. How you think about those people comes across all the time, sometimes without you even meaning it. Your attitude to church itself, the way you conceive it in terms of importance in your family life, all those things actually set the platform for how they will think about it later on. So that's a really important piece.
Yeah.
If you don't treat the gathering, the getting to church, giving to the church in terms of your ministry effort and money, all those things, if you don't treat it well, then they're not going to have a reason to see it to be important when they grow up. That's one thing. So the way you treat and talk about and influences and model that. The second thing is, how their experience of church themselves when they come, and how you talk about those difficulties when it comes, whether it's another difficult child in their either kids class or kids church class, or the difficulty that they might be having with someone at youth or one of their peers. How you talk about them navigating that influences their uptake of things. Certainly, their peer group is especially when they become teenagers. Their peer group is really good. So if you haven't been coming to church regularly and they're not connected with other kids who are also doing this thing, when they get to the teen years and they know no other Christians that are their friends, that puts them in a really hard position.
Yeah.
It puts them in such a hard position that they've got no one of their friend group, whether it's at school or outside of school, that is someone that they can relate to about Jesus.
Yeah, yes.
And so having peers, like-minded peers who are also on the journey of faith is almost like, I want to say essential, because God can do anything, but it's crucial.
Oh, yeah. I think of like myself. If I went to church and I consistently had no one that I felt like I could get along with, that could become a friend or a peer or whatnot at church, I'd just be digging deep into my convictions constantly. I'm like, well, I trust that I'd do it. But man, you know what I mean? And it's like, you've got to really bank on the deepest convictions to trudge your way through when you just feel like you don't have probably the enjoyment of fellowship. You know what I mean? But in the way that's age appropriate for them. You know what I mean? So yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the peers are so influential on what they think and believe and want to be, grow up into. And that's only exacerbated, that disconnection between their peers, when you are irregular through the primary years.
Yeah.
If you're irregular at church and your child goes to a different school, and lots of my kids have gone to different schools than what other kids at church have gone to. And so, that's been a really key thing, that regularity at church during the primary years and into early high school.
Yeah, it's helpful.
So like teenagers, when they do time together, they become friends.
What do you think about, I hear of some people that have like a opt-out cutoff date that's like you go to church and growth group. But when you're 14, 16, 18, that's when you can opt out. Do you think that's useful? What do you think about
Oh, I think it depends on your style of parenting, for
that? Mm,
starters. Obviously, people with that style of parenting will probably want to do that. You've got to gauge that. There'd be a point where that's going to be detrimental to them, either currently or future coming to faith, in terms of how you've treated them and their choice.
mm,
Um, our kids are different. They haven't all wanted to continue in faith, um, and that kind of thing. And that was tricky for those years. But yeah, we did that. We
mm,
said we are this age, and so you know it's going to be this is what we do as a family
mm.
every week. So we're doing this,
Yeah.
and we're not leaving you at home too young.
Mm.
And that was into the young teen years as well.
Yeah, yes.
But there was a point where that became really tricky
Mm.
to manage ourselves and
Yeah, yes.
navigate. And so we try our best to, um, yeah, help that along.
Mm.
But um, ultimately, it will be them that decides whether they
Yeah, yeah.
start go. And you've got to judge kind of kids' personality and your relationship with them and your parenting style
Mm.
to date and what they've experienced. If you don't know how your kids have experienced your parenting, there's something missing.
Ah, yeah.
Do you know? If
Yeah.
you're completely oblivious to the way that your parenting has impacted your kids into the teen years, then you've missed a big step. And they'll tell you you've had your head in the sand. Teenagers are very likely to tell you when it's
Yeah,
not
yeah.
going so great.
Yeah. Mm.
It's not be, and that in my mind is not because you've had a fight with them.
Mm.
That's what parents and teenagers should do.
Mm.
They should have fights. They're not best friends.
Yeah.
They shouldn't be best friends.
Mm.
That's a different relationship.
Yeah.
Um, and so, yeah, I'm not talking about that.
Mm.
I'm talking about, yeah, parents can be quite unaware of, yeah, how the application of their parenting strategy is actually landing.
Mm.
So I'd want to say, be aware.
Ah, that's helpful.
Ask your kids.
Yeah.
Sit them down honestly and say, we really want to know how you found this rule or this particular
Mm.
aspect. Because ultimately, of all the things you want to teach them, of all the bits and pieces, faith is the key thing that you want them to nail down
Mm.
and decide for themselves. And creating the conditions where they can come to that decision themselves is really key. Um, and the way you approach that can have a big impact on
Mm.
whether it's for Christ or against.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Yeah.
So,
That's interesting.
yeah.
Yeah. It's a tricky thing to navigate. But yeah, you've got to navigate that individually
So
very much.
be
Yeah.
very aware
Yeah.
of how it's landing.
It's good.
Yeah. And talk to them about it.
Mm.
Like, have it as a discussion, like out in the open.
Yeah.
Like, to dilly dally around and not have it as part of the regular conversations in the home.
Mm.
Um, yeah, it's hard.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's the hardest thing in parenting,
Mm.
actually, is that to go through all those years of all the nappies, all the bedtime stories, all the sacrifice that parents do make for the sake of kids and their growth to maturity or growing to
Mm.
maturity, to have them not take up faith uh, is one of the hardest things ever.
Mm. Yeah.
So get praying, people.
Yeah.
Get praying.
Mm.